Black entrepreneur disguises himself as a beggar in his own restaurant, and what happens next shocks everyone. Amid luxury and sophistication, Darius Taylor, a respected owner of an African-American restaurant in New York, finds himself at a crossroads. He cannot ignore the way customers and staff treat those living on the streets, and the guilt of having left his humble origins behind haunts him. Darius then decides to infiltrate his own business, adopting a new identity to discover how far human empathy can go. Darius grew up in a tough neighborhood where financial struggles shaped his childhood. He always promised himself that, upon achieving success, he would do everything possible not to forget his roots. However, as his restaurant became a symbol of success, he realized that the coldness towards the needy had not changed. Frustrated with the indifference he witnessed, Darius decides to take action. He disguises himself as Ben, a former veteran who has lost everything, and begins to frequent his own restaurant, observing the behaviors of people who used to ignore him. As Ben walks down the street in front of the restaurant, he encounters the manager, Lucy Johnson. A dedicated woman to her job, Lucy is strict and pragmatic, focused on maintaining the establishment's image. When she spots Ben, her first reaction is one of contempt, reinforcing the exclusion policy that Darius desperately wants to change. At the same time, Kevin, a young waiter who dreams of becoming a chef, shows compassion for Ben, secretly bringing him food. The interactions between the three create a tense and revealing environment that challenges Darius's perceptions of his community and his role in it. Jenna, a frequent customer, initially feels uncomfortable with Ben's presence and demands that Lucy take action, showing how prejudice seeps into even the most respectable minds. As the days go by, Ben's presence begins to change the atmosphere of the restaurant, prompting people to confront their own attitudes and prejudices. Darius watches, anguished but determined to provoke a transformation. After weeks of observation, Darius finally reveals his true identity on a busy night, surprising everyone. The shock generates a moment of deep reflection, and he seizes the opportunity to discuss the importance of empathy and how everyone's actions can impact another person's life. With a new purpose, Darius decides to use part of the restaurant's profits to support initiatives that help the less fortunate, promising a more inclusive future. Thus, Darius's journey as an invisible entrepreneur is not just a quest for self-knowledge, but a reflection on the responsibility that comes with success and the importance of never forgetting where one came from. Darius, under the identity of Ben, felt like an intruder in his own restaurant. The environment that was synonymous with his success now seemed like a stage where he was playing a role. He blended among the customers, observing the interactions and the disdainful looks directed at him. With each passing day, frustration grew within him. He saw how his customers, who feasted on exquisite dishes, ignored Ben's humanity, treating him as an object, a stain on the elegance of the place. Lucy, the manager, was one of the first obstacles Darius faced. She was a strong woman, but her rigidity showed that her decisions were driven by the desire to maintain the restaurant's image. When Ben asked for a glass of water, she looked at him with disdain. "Get out of here," she said with a brusque gesture. Darius felt a deep pain upon hearing the tone of her voice. He remembered how, in his youth, people often ignored him. He wanted Lucy to see beyond appearances, but she was so immersed in her vision of what the restaurant should be that she couldn't see the human being in front of her. This initial shock made Darius question whether he could really change anything. Meanwhile, Kevin, the young waiter, was the light amidst that darkness. He worked hard and dreamed of one day becoming a chef. Unlike Lucy, Kevin had a generous heart. Whenever he could, he approached Ben, offering him small portions of leftover food from the kitchen. This unusual friendship began to form, and Darius felt a genuine connection with the young man. But even this relationship began to be tested when Lucy, noticing the interaction between the two, pulled Kevin aside and warned him. "Don't get involved with that kind, Kevin. It could hurt your career." Her words echoed in Darius's mind, making him realize how the environment he had created was stifling empathy. As the days passed, Darius found himself struggling against the growing emotional tension the situation was causing him. He wanted to help Kevin achieve his dreams, but he also needed to protect his own identity. The idea of being discovered terrified him. What if that happened? What would Lucy say? Darius began to feel that his inner strength was being tested with every moment he spent under Ben's skin. He had to keep his composure, but the pressure was becoming unbearable. The situation became even more complicated on a particularly busy night. Jenna, a frequent customer, was at a table near the window. She was an influential restaurant critic and always brought friends to try Darius's cuisine. Upon seeing him, she made a sarcastic comment out loud. "Look, a beggar at the restaurant door. This is exactly what we need to lower the standard." The laughter of her friends echoed through the hall, and Darius felt a lump in his throat. This public humiliation was not just about him. It was about everyone who, like Ben, was invisible to society. Darius began to wonder if he could really continue with his plan. The idea of exposing the truths about human indifference was starting to seem like an impossible task. What if, in trying to bring about change, he only caused more division? He found himself in a labyrinth of emotions, questioning his own belief in the goodness of people. Each day the interactions became more difficult, and the pressure to maintain his identity intensified. Meanwhile, his friendship with Kevin seemed to be the only anchor keeping him steady. The young waiter, even under Lucy's pressure, continued to offer support. But this friendship, which had begun as a refuge, also started to create dilemmas. Darius wanted to protect Kevin from any consequences their friendship might cause, but at the same time he knew he was clinging to something that couldn't last. The weight of the secret began to feel like an unbearable burden, and Darius realized that to truly make a difference, he would have to confront not only the indifference of others, but also the fears within himself. With each obstacle that arose, Darius found himself closer to a change not only in his life, but in the lives of everyone around him. He knew that true transformation would require courage and vulnerability, and he was about to discover what it really meant to reconnect with his roots and fight for a fairer world. Darius, under the identity of Ben, felt more and more like an actor in a cruel show. The humiliation he suffered the night before, when Jenna mocked him, still echoed in his thoughts. He wondered if he was doing the right thing by hiding behind a new persona. The restaurant, once a symbol of his achievements, was now a battleground where he fought against indifference and hostility. The pressure increased each day. Lucy, with her unyielding demeanor, continued to monitor every move Ben made, as if he were a threat to her empire of elegance. Their interactions turned into a game of cat and mouse, where Darius was always a step behind. He knew that any slip could expose his true identity and ruin not only his life but also Kevin's, who seemed increasingly involved in his struggle. That week, Darius decided it was time to take action. He wanted to do something that would show the truth about people's lives as Ben. So he began to approach other invisible clients in the restaurant, the dishwashers, the cooks, and even the waiters who were ignored while serving. Darius wanted to give a voice to those who, like him, were invisible in society, but this idea of connection and empathy was not well received. When Lucy realized that Darius was interacting with the staff, she confronted him in a cutting tone. "You're not here to make friends, Ben. Remember your place," she said, with a look that could freeze fire. Darius felt his heart tighten. It was a harsh reminder that, even in his fight for change, there were limits that could not be crossed. He could feel the weight of her disapproval, and it made him hesitate. With each word Lucy uttered, Darius felt more trapped in his own web of lies. That very night, the tension reached its peak. A group of food critics, including Jenna, was at the restaurant. Darius, as Ben was in charge of serving tables, he struggled to remain calm, but the hostile atmosphere and sarcastic comments increasingly distressed him. When Jenna made another joke about his presence, Darius felt a heat rise to his head. He wanted to scream, wanted everyone to see who he really was and what lay behind his story, but instead, he fell silent, stifling his anger. The emotional impact of this situation began to affect his physical health. Darius couldn't sleep well, and each day he felt more exhausted. The dark circles under his eyes grew deeper, and his energy waned. He battled the feeling that he was sinking into an abyss of despair. Frustration and helplessness became constant companions, and the idea that he was drifting away from his true self tormented him. He wondered if he could endure being in that role for much longer. Meanwhile, his friendship with Kevin became increasingly precious to Darius. Kevin, noticing the change in Ben's behavior, tried to offer support, but Lucy's pressure made him hesitant. One day after a long shift, Kevin approached Darius and said, "You don't have to be this way, Ben. You can be who you really are." This statement made Darius feel a mix of relief and fear. He was desperate for someone to understand him, but at the same time he knew that if he revealed his true identity, he could lose everything. Kevin's words echoed in his mind, and Darius began to reflect on what he truly wanted. He realized he was at a critical juncture. The struggle for empathy and social change he desired seemed increasingly distant, and the pressure to stay hidden was becoming unbearable. He wondered if what he was doing was really the right path. Doubt began to gnaw at his determination, and the fear of failure became a constant shadow. Before we continue with this thrilling story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. And let us know in the comments which city you are watching this video from. The emotional tension culminated in a decisive moment. During a hectic service, a crisis in the kitchen caused the dishes to not be delivered on time. Chaos ensued, and Darius saw Kevin nearly in tears trying to control the situation. He felt the urge to intervene, to help him, but Lucy's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the consequences of revealing his true identity. Thus he found himself trapped once again, struggling between the desire to help and the fear of exposing himself. The twists that Darius faced were a reflection of the internal battle he was waging. He needed to find a path that would lead him to reconnect with his roots. But the road was filled with challenges. Each obstacle that arose not only tested his strength, but also his faith in human goodness. The friendship with Kevin, which had once been a light in his journey, was now becoming a source of conflict, forcing Darius to confront his limitations and question what it truly meant to be true to himself. The pressure in the restaurant was unbearable. Darius, under the identity of Ben, increasingly felt like a prisoner. The situation in the kitchen was worsening, and chaos was spreading quickly. He looked at Kevin, who with wide eyes and trembling hands was trying to organize the orders amidst the turmoil. The weight of responsibility was clear on his face, and Darius couldn't help but notice how hard his friend was trying. It was at that moment that the kitchen door swung open forcefully and Lucy entered, her expression grim. "Where are the plates?" she shouted, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Fear and anxiety filled the environment, and for a moment Darius felt that everything could collapse. He knew he needed to act, but Lucy's voice still echoed in his mind, reminding him that his position was only that of a waiter. But deep down, something inside him began to stir. He could no longer stand by, watching his friend drown in chaos. With a surge of determination, Darius approached Kevin. "Let's do this together," he said, the determination starting to take over his voice. "I can help." Kevin looked surprised, and a spark of hope ignited in his eyes. "Do you think you can?" he asked, hesitantly. Darius took a deep breath and for a moment forgot his worries about being discovered. He realized there was more at stake than just his identity. He was seeing his friend struggle, and that made him remember who he really was. "Yes, I can," he replied, more confident than he felt. Together, they began to work in the kitchen. Darius recalled the techniques he had learned in his previous life. He grabbed pots, organized ingredients, and started preparing the delayed dishes. It was as if a new energy had taken over him, and for the first time in a long time, he found himself connected to what he truly loved, cooking and creating. As they worked, Darius felt something change inside him. The fear that paralyzed him began to dissipate, and the feeling of contributing to something greater transformed him. He realized that his identity was not limited to a name or a role. He was more than Ben or Darius. He was a person capable of making a difference. However, the euphoria was short-lived. As the dishes began to leave the kitchen, the tension rose again. Darius heard the murmurs of critics in the dining room, and Jenna's presence with her sarcastic look was a constant reminder of his internal struggle. But instead of letting himself be downcast, he decided to use that negative energy as fuel. He was not just a waiter that night, he was a co-creator of something meaningful. The night progressed, and despite the challenges, Darius and Kevin managed to control the situation. When the last dish was served, Darius felt an immense relief. But at the same time, the adrenaline began to dissipate, and reality pressed down on him again. He looked at Kevin, who was exhausted, yet smiling. "We did it, buddy," Darius said with a genuine smile. But before they could celebrate, Lucy appeared again. "What was that?" she asked, her voice filled with disdain. "You two think you can just act like you're the chefs behind the front line. You have no idea what it means to be responsible for a restaurant." Lucy's words cut Darius like a blade. He felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sadness, and frustration. What he had done was something beautiful, something that should be celebrated, but instead, it was being belittled. The pressure he had tried to ignore returned with full force, and he realized that despite the momentary success, his struggle was far from over. Darius looked into Lucy's eyes, and for the first time, he felt courage. "I know I'm not a chef, but that doesn't mean I can't contribute. What we did today was a team effort, and if you can't see that, maybe the problem isn't with us, but with you." The words came out before he could stop himself. Silence fell over the kitchen and the restaurant, and Darius realized he had crossed a line. The tension in the air was palpable. He had exposed himself. The unexpected revelation of his own strength and determination shook his world. He felt that he had finally confronted one of his deepest fears, the fear of being seen, of being heard, and of being true. In that moment, everything changed. He could no longer live hidden behind an identity that wasn't his. The struggle for empathy and connection that he desired was more than a dream. It was a necessity. Darius knew that from that moment on, he would have to make difficult choices and face the consequences of his actions. But at the same time, he felt he had found a new purpose. His friendship with Kevin would become a pillar in his new journey, and he was ready to face the challenges that would come, because being true to himself, even amidst fear and uncertainty, was the only way to truly live. Darius felt the weight of the words he had just spoken. The tension in the kitchen was almost palpable, and Lucy's gaze seemed to pierce through him. He knew he had crossed a line, but a part of him felt relieved to have finally spoken out. However, the joy was fleeting. The consequences of his boldness began to unfold rapidly. Lucy, with an angry expression, did not respond immediately. The silence that followed was deafening, and Darius could hear his heart pounding in his chest. He looked at Kevin, who was in shock, his eyes alternating between surprise and concern. Darius realized that this scene was affecting not just him, but everyone around him. "Do you really think you can talk to me like that?" Lucy finally said, her voice tense. "You don't understand anything about what goes on here. You have no idea how much work it takes to keep a restaurant running." With each word, Darius felt his courage beginning to crumble. He had acted on impulse, and now he wondered if he had made a mistake. But before he could backtrack, Kevin intervened. "Lucy, wait." Darius helped save the night. He did something important. We need to acknowledge that. Kevin's words echoed in the kitchen, and Darius felt a mix of gratitude and relief. He was not alone, but his victory was far from complete. Lucy crossed her arms and looked at both of them with disdain. "That doesn't change the fact that you're still just waiters. The responsibility is mine, and I can't afford mistakes." Darius felt the weight of frustration in his throat. He didn't want to fight, but he also didn't want to feel diminished. He had battled fear for so long, and now wanted to be seen as someone who could contribute. "Lucy, I know you're under pressure," he began, trying to stay calm, "but that doesn't mean we can't work together. We all want the same goal, which is to make this restaurant work." Lucy's expression softened a little, but she was still defensive. "You might be right, but that doesn't change what you did. You can't just walk into the kitchen and do whatever you want." Darius realized he needed to find a way to make Lucy understand his point of view. He took a deep breath and decided to be honest. "I just wanted to help. I'm not just Ben, the waiter. I have skills that can make a difference here. I want to be part of the team, not an obstacle." Lucy's expression began to change slowly. She seemed contemplative, and Darius realized that maybe, just maybe, he had managed to hit a point of connection. But even though the conversation was unfolding, the atmosphere in the restaurant was still tense. What had been a chaotic night was still far from resolved. After Lucy left, Darius and Kevin stepped away a bit, trying to process everything that had happened. "You were amazing," Kevin said, still a bit in shock. "I didn't know you had that in you." "I didn't know either," Darius replied, looking at the ground. "But at the same time, I'm worried. What happened here could have consequences. Lucy won't forget." Darius's concern was not unfounded. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the restaurant changed. Lucy became more critical, and Darius felt like he was constantly being watched. He was aware that his position as a waiter was threatened, and that any mistake could be fatal for him. The pressure increased, and he began to struggle with it. In the evenings, he sat in his small apartment reflecting on the situation. The insecurities he thought he had overcome began to resurface. Darius wondered if he really belonged in that environment. He felt an emotional weight that followed him like a shadow that wouldn't let him be at peace. Over time, Darius decided he couldn't let himself be defeated. He started to work harder, dedicating himself to improving his skills. In the kitchen, he strived to show that he was a valuable member of the team. He began experimenting with new recipes, bringing a bit of his own creativity to the menu. Kevin continued to support him, and that became a source of strength. They talked about their dreams and insecurities, and Darius realized that sharing his struggles was helping him feel more connected and confident. Even with the fear of Lucy looming over him, Darius felt more determined to prove his worth. The road ahead was still full of challenges, but Darius began to understand that the real struggle was not just about his identity, but about his ability to connect with others and assert himself. He was ready to face the consequences of his actions, and he was finally starting to feel like the person he had always wanted to be. Darius was at a point in his life where he felt lost. The tension in the restaurant's kitchen still echoed in his mind, and the weight of unspoken words followed him like a shadow. He hadn't just challenged Lucy, he had challenged himself. That moment of bravery hadn't been enough to erase his insecurities, but it had sparked a flame within him. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the restaurant became heavy. Lucy, in her quest for perfection, seemed more critical than ever. Darius felt her eyes on him, as if he were constantly being evaluated. He knew he needed to prove his worth not just to Lucy, but to himself. It was a challenge that made him feel anxious, but it also pushed him to act. He began arriving earlier, dedicating time to study recipes and cooking techniques. Mixing ingredients, he tried to create something new, something that showed his passion for cooking. In those moments, he felt free, as if he were finally discovering himself. Each dish he prepared became an extension of his identity, a way to assert himself. He was more than a waiter, he was a creator. Kevin, always by his side, noticed this change. "You're different, Darius," he said one day, as they watched the kitchen from the service area. "It seems like you've found something within you." Darius smiled, but the insecurity was still present. "I'm trying," he replied. "I want to show that I can do more." The friendship between Darius and Kevin grew. They talked about their aspirations and fears, and this connection became a source of strength for Darius. He remembered how he had felt isolated before, believing he didn't belong in that place. Now, with Kevin's support, he began to see that he was not alone on this journey. It was as if the two of them were navigating a stormy sea, but together, the storm felt less daunting. Over time, Darius realized that his efforts were paying off. He began to receive compliments from other team members, and even Lucy seemed to notice his dedication. On one of the most stressful days, she approached him and said, "You have been putting in a lot of effort. Keep it up." This simple affirmation had a profound impact. Darius felt validated, as if he was finally being seen. However, there were still challenges ahead. One day, a mistake happened during service. Darius, nervous, mixed up the orders at a table, and upon realizing it, his heart sank. He could have given in to despair, but instead, he decided to take action. He approached the table and apologized, explaining the situation. To his surprise, the customers were understanding and even laughed at the confusion. From that moment on, Darius learned that failing was not the end. It was a learning opportunity. He began to see each challenge as a chance to grow. His confidence started to solidify, and he felt more comfortable expressing himself, not only in the kitchen but in his life. Darius's overcoming did not just stop at work. He began to apply the lessons he learned in other aspects of his life. At home, he dedicated himself to hobbies he had previously set aside. He started painting, exploring photography, and rediscovering the joy in activities that made him happy. Each new experience was a step toward a deeper understanding of himself. Moreover, Darius realized that success was not just about being recognized or making money. It was about the satisfaction of doing what he loved and the joy of connecting with the people around him. He began to appreciate the small victories, like a well-prepared dish or a smile from a satisfied customer. This shift in perspective brought a new meaning to his life. Months passed, and Darius became an integral part of the team. His friendship with Kevin blossomed, and they became an inseparable duo, sharing laughter and venting. Together they faced the ups and downs of work, further strengthening their connection. As Darius reflected on his journey, he realized he had transformed. He was no longer the insecure waiter who feared being underestimated. He had found his voice and, with it, carved out a new space in his life. The kitchen, which had once been a place of tension, became an environment where he could shine. Darius learned the art of resilience. He discovered that even in adversity, there were opportunities for growth. Life was a series of fresh starts, and each one brought him closer to who he truly was. He was ready to face whatever came next, with a stronger heart and a more open mind. Darius was about to face his greatest challenge. The restaurant had been selected for an important event where a renowned food critic would visit and evaluate the place. The pressure was palpable, and everyone in the kitchen was nervous. For Darius, this meant not only an opportunity to shine, but also a chance to prove to himself that he had changed and grown. That day, the atmosphere was electric. Darius felt his heart race as he watched Lucy move with precision and urgency. She was the chef, and her expectations were high. Darius knew it was his responsibility to help the team stand out at this event. He had to be at his best, but anxiety began to take hold of him. As the dishes were being prepared, Darius noticed that Lucy was more critical than ever. A small mistake from a colleague led to an explosion of her frustration. Darius took a deep breath, trying to focus on his task. He wanted to show that he was strong enough to handle the pressure, but the shadow of his insecurity was still following him. He remembered all the nights he spent practicing, how he had learned to deal with failures and rise again. It was time to put all of that into practice. In the middle of the service, something unexpected happened. One of the cooks had a problem with a crucial dish that needed to be served, and the tension in the kitchen rose rapidly. Lucy started shouting orders, and Darius felt his stomach churn. He knew he needed to act, but doubt began to haunt him. What should he do? Should he stay quiet or try to help? Remembering everything he had learned about resilience and courage, Darius decided to intervene. He realized that the situation required calm and creativity, not just shouting. "Lucy, can I try to solve this?" he said, his voice steady, even though his heart was pounding. She hesitated for a moment, but the urgency of the situation made her agree. Darius stepped up to the counter and began to improvise. He remembered some recipes he had experimented with and decided to combine ingredients in an innovative way, creating a dish that not only replaced the original, but also brought new life to the menu. As he worked, Darius felt confidence start to flow through him. He was no longer just trying to please, he was creating something that reflected who he truly was. When the dish was finished, he presented it to Lucy. She looked at him, surprised. "You really did this?" she asked, the tension in her face beginning to dissipate. Darius, with a sparkle in his eyes, simply nodded. They served the dish to the critic, and the silence in the kitchen was deafening as everyone awaited the reaction. Darius remembered his past failures, the fear that paralyzed him, and how throughout the journey he had learned to value the small steps, the little victories. He had picked himself up several times, and now he was about to see the result of his effort. The critic tasted the dish and, in a moment that felt eternal, closed his eyes. When he finally spoke, his words were like music to the ears of Darius and the entire team. "This is a bold and flavorful dish, a true reflection of the creativity that can be expected from a great restaurant." Relief and joy flooded the kitchen. Darius felt a wave of emotion. He had overcome his greatest challenge, and the critic's approval was the validation of all his effort. But more importantly, he had proven to himself that he was capable. Lucy approached him, and the expression on her face was one of respect. "You really stood out, Darius." "I'm impressed," she said, and Darius realized that this word, impressed, carried enormous weight. He was no longer just a waiter, he was a chef. At the end of the event, while the team celebrated, Darius looked at Kevin. Their friendship had grown even stronger that day. Together they had faced pressure and uncertainty. Darius smiled, knowing he was no longer alone. The journey of overcoming had taught him to value not just success, but also the people who accompanied him. Darius realized that true wealth was not just in being recognized, but in knowing that he had found his voice and his passion. He had learned that life was made up of new beginnings, and each failure was an opportunity for growth. With renewed confidence, he was ready for whatever came next, aware that regardless of the challenges, there would always be a new chance to shine. After the event, the kitchen was in celebration. The aroma of the dishes still lingered in the air, but what truly stood out was the contagious euphoria of the team. Darius watched his colleagues laughing and hugging, and a smile formed on his face. He had been part of something bigger, something that transcended his insecurities and fears. Lucy approached him, still with a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "Darius, your idea was brilliant. Not only did it save the dish, but it brought something new to the table. You really showed that you belong here," she said, and her words were like a seal of approval. Darius felt warmed, as if the tension that had accompanied him for so long was finally dissipating. Kevin came right after, jumping with joy. "Did you see the critic's face? He loved it. Let's celebrate." Darius laughed and joined his friends in a circle, sharing stories about the event and the expectations that were now forming for the restaurant's future. He realized that it wasn't just him who had changed. Everyone around him felt the transformation. The team was more united, more confident, That night, as everyone dispersed, Darius stayed to help clean the kitchen. He knew that the work was never done, but now he did it with a new purpose. As he washed the pots, memories of his journey resurfaced. The sleepless nights, the mistakes, the moments of doubt, every step seemed worth it. He had learned that each challenge was a disguised opportunity. Later, as Darius walked home, he reflected on everything that had happened. The critic not only praised his dish, but he had achieved something much greater, faith in himself. With every corner he turned, he remembered how he had hesitated before offering to help Lucy. Now he felt he had a voice, a presence in the kitchen, something he had never felt before. The next day, upon returning to work, Darius noticed a change in the atmosphere. The team members were more excited, as if the critic's approval had ignited a flame of motivation in everyone. Lucy, upon entering the kitchen, announced that they would have a meeting to discuss new ideas for the menu. "We need more dishes like the one you created, Darius. You brought something special to the team," she said, and Darius felt a wave of humility. He had not only contributed, but had also inspired others to take risks. During the meeting, Darius had the courage to share some of his own ideas. He saw the faces of his colleagues light up with enthusiasm. What had once been a place of competition now felt like a collaborative space where everyone could contribute. At the end of the meeting, Lucy looked at Darius and commented, "You really changed the dynamic here. I'm glad you found your voice." As the weeks passed, the team began working on new dishes and experimenting with bold combinations. Darius felt more comfortable expressing his ideas, and on many occasions he was the first to suggest innovations. He realized that his growth was not just personal, it was contagious to everyone around him. The kitchen was now a vibrant space where creativity flourished. Reflecting on his journey, Darius understood that true victory was not just in pleasing a renowned critic, but in having managed to overcome his own limitations. He had built a new version of himself, one that was willing to take risks and support his team. In that environment, he no longer felt like just a waiter, but a chef with much to offer. At the end of a long workday, Kevin approached him and with a smile said, "You really are an inspiration, Darius. Not just to me, but to all of us." Darius smiled, his heart full of gratitude. He knew that the journey was just beginning, but now he was not afraid of what lay ahead. He had found his place, and this was just the beginning of a new story, full of flavor, friendship, and courage. Darius continued his journey in the kitchen, turning each day into a new opportunity for growth. He not only stood out as a talented cook, but he also became a pillar of support for his colleagues. The team was closer than ever, and the atmosphere of collaboration and creativity flourished. The euphoria of the previous event still reverberated, and the kitchen had become a space where everyone felt comfortable sharing ideas and innovations. Over time, Darius realized that his insecurities were dissipating. He had learned to value his voice and his place on the team. When a new dish he had suggested was added to the menu, the joy he felt was indescribable. With every compliment from satisfied customers, he remembered the critic who had ignited his spark of self-confidence. Success was no longer just about winning awards or praise. For Darius, the true triumph was seeing his team shine alongside him. However, not everything was perfect. An old rival in the kitchen, who had always tried to undermine his confidence, began to sense the change. He didn't like seeing Darius thrive and decided to take action. Using his influence, he made an anonymous complaint about the quality of Darius's dishes, trying to discredit his talent. When Darius learned about the situation, a wave of frustration washed over him. He was determined not to let this bring him down again. Instead of succumbing, Darius decided to take action. He focused even more on his work, seeking feedback from colleagues and honing his techniques. He also began sharing his knowledge by organizing small cooking sessions with the team, where everyone could learn and grow together. Through this approach, he not only improved his skills, but also further strengthened the bonds of friendship and trust among team members. The day of the critic's new evaluation arrived, and Darius was nervous but prepared. He decided that regardless of the outcome, he had learned the importance of teamwork and self-confidence. When the critic tasted his dish, the tension was palpable. He took notes, but in the end smiled and began to praise Darius and his team. "You all created something extraordinary here," he said, and Darius felt his heart swell with joy. With the upcoming positive review, Darius not only proved his skill, but also unmasked the rival who had tried to ruin him. The team was stronger than ever, and Darius took satisfaction in knowing that the true victory was not just personal, but collective. The one who had tried to bring him down was now seen as someone who had no place in the restaurant's new dynamic. Now, Darius knew that true wealth was not just in external recognition, but in the friendship and support he and his team had cultivated. He had overcome his insecurities, and in doing so helped others do the same. The kitchen was now filled with laughter, innovations, and renewed confidence. Looking back, Darius realized that his journey was full of valuable lessons. He learned that personal overcoming is often accompanied by the strength we find in others. Friendship and collaboration can transform a competitive space into a true home, and above all, he understood that success is sweeter when shared. If you have also faced challenges and overcome your insecurities, share your experiences in the comments. Every story has the power to inspire and motivate others who are going through similar situations. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more content that celebrates the strength of friendship and the importance of overcoming. Your interaction helps bring more exciting stories like this, and your voice is crucial in this journey. The time to act is now.